Hello and welcome to the channel. My name is Joseph Carroll, and I have Steve from Steve Talks Books here today, and we're going to be discussing the Hellbound Heart and Hellraiser. Um, so if Steve wants to do a little bit more introduction, I see he's got the web page down there now in the description.
Yeah, I forgot to change it.
Yeah,
So
that's awesome.
yeah, yeah, it's just our forum where we plan all of our events and chat and stuff. So yeah, thanks for having me. It's one of those books I've always wanted to read and one of those movies I've always wanted to watch. So it worked out.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you if you had heard of the book. I'm sure like Hellraiser is one of those, I guess no pun intended, like a cult following for the movies.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah. I had known about the movie. I didn't know much about it, but I knew a little bit about the book. But I knew Clive Barker wrote it. That's about all I knew.
have
Yeah,
you read any of his other stuff?
I haven't, but I have Cabal on the shelf somewhere. So I hope to get to that eventually.
Yeah, I'd never read anything by him, but I know over like about a year ago, a couple of his other books, like Weave World, a handful of bigger YouTubers, booktubers were reading it,
Hmm.
and I remember playing. Of course, I watched the movies. I was probably far too young when I originally watched them, but so I knew about them, but I actually never knew that it was based off a book.
Hmm.
Um, and I know he's created a lot of stuff. Like he's in comic books, video games, and stuff. I remember playing Clive Barker's Jericho back in the day,
Oh,
and that being like still to this day, they're like my favorite horror video game. It's like a portal like fantasy where they go in and out of like demon lairs and different stuff like that and different times.
hmm.
A lot of it takes place in like 1919 World War I and stuff. But
Hmm.
um, honestly, I picked up the book um, because I was like, well, I want to give him a chance, and I was going back and forth between like Mr. Be Gone because I've heard good stuff about that too, and then and I was like, well, this one's a shorter book, so I was like, I can pop that. Like honestly, I was like, that's a shorter book, but and then I started like reading the synopsis, and I'm like, oh crap, this is Hellraiser,
Yeah.
you know. And I just thought I was like, oh, so that I was like, well, that's awesome, you know. But it's been years since I watched the original movie, so and then I and I thought of you. I was like, Steve. I was like, Steve's big into horror. I wonder if he's already seen the movie or if he's read this before, and that's why I contacted you.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm glad you did because I've been wanting to read Clive Barker. I just didn't really know where to start either. So, um,
Yeah,
but I knew he did some comic books because I saw some like Hellraiser comics back. I don't know. It's been a long time, but I didn't know a whole lot about it. I just knew that, and I wonder why they changed the name of the movie to Hellraiser instead of the Hellbound Heart.
yeah, that was interesting too. And I don't know if it was the '80s, so they were trying to be edgy, more edgy,
Maybe.
like Hellraiser,
Yeah.
Uh, but I was, doing a little bit of research, and that like he's a weird guy, right? And he had like, I guess he had several like really like raunchy names that he was thinking about making the movie. Something about like, I don't know, he was into some like weird BSM and all
Hmm.
kinds of crazy stuff back in the day. But I think Hellraiser was probably the best option of the ones that I've seen that he was. I mean, if you just think about like the Cenobites, which is like knowing that he wrote this book back in like the early '80s is like really cool because I mean I'm sure you've read some stuff that's kind of similar to the Cenobites where they're kind of in interdimensional kind of beings, but um for being as old as the book is, I mean, he might have been one of the first to really do this style of horror. Not that I have seen.
Yeah, we
But
have a lot. Yeah, yeah, it is. I didn't think about it until you just mentioned it, like the BDSM stuff. Because they're the Cenobites and their outfits and the leather and that's I would assume would be pretty at the time, maybe not the norm. It'd be
yeah,
kind of pushing the limits a little bit, and especially where the holes are in the suits in the movie, where it's a little suggestive. But yeah, I'm sure we'll get into that.
uh, yeah. Well, apparently, Clive Barker used to hang out at those like underground clubs and stuff back in the '70s. And
Really?
yeah, and they said that that's where he got his like inspiration for the for the book and the movie. He wanted to be like
Hmm.
he wanted. Well, I guess that the book is centered around like sexuality and desire and you know and and different things of those kind of natures. What is pleasure? I thought that was one of the cooler aspects is when he was the opening scene of the book is really the visuals that Clive Barker paints, of him like he's like standing there in that circle and he's got all these different objects to sate them and stuff, from like what like it's like a jug of urine and like
Yeah.
some other crazy objects. And I was just I was like just thinking to myself like, how do you come up with this? Like, what's this your first? Is this the first image you had in your head? Like, this is how we're going to start this book off.
Yeah, I did like the beginning of the book. I thought it set the stage really quickly and it let you know what you're in for. Um,
Yeah,
so I did like that about the book a lot. I thought the first, especially that first section where we get to know Frank and that he's has this box and he's trying to get it open. It's like a puzzle, and it's not just you press a button and it opens. It
yeah,
takes effort. It's like something you have to, almost like something you have to earn. It's not just you can't just stumble upon it and press a button and you're there. But I did like that introduction. That kind of set the tone right away for what kind of story it's going to be, because you knew Frank fairly well, pretty quick.
yeah, and that's what I liked, especially in the book for being as short as the book was. You did get to know Frank and Clive Barker kind of like you said, set the stage where things don't happen just instantaneously.
Hmm.
He had to go out and seek the box, the Le Marchart configuration,
Yeah.
and then he had to spend. I don't remember exactly how long they said, but it was an amount of time he had to spend actually messing with the object to figure out how to open it, um, and just the visuals, and also like Clive Barker's prose like were really, I was not expecting them to be as good as they were, especially this. I think I don't know if this was his first book, but it was one of
Mm.
his earlier books. I was like, man, I was like, this guy, he can write.
Yeah. Yeah, I did like his style too. I thought it was, I don't want to say simple, but it was effective. It was really tight. There was no wasted words or lines or anything. It's really tight and effective. And I was surprised that he gets a lot in a short period of time. A lot of story done in a short period of
Yeah,
time.
yeah. That's one thing that kind of oh,
Oh, oh, filming. Oh, okay,
nice.
nice.
Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah,
She's everywhere helping the smaller booktubers.
yeah, definitely huge help.
Yeah, hung out with her for about an hour the other day with her live stream. So,
Oh, nice.
but yeah, yeah, exactly like you said. Like there's no fat on the book at all. I mean, he's like giving you exactly what you need to know to move the story forward. And there were some changes that that they made from, and he directed the movie too. So it was, some of the things were odd
Yeah.
that they ended up changing. But I was just like, I guess I guess it would work out, and I guess we'll get to that in a little bit. But um, what did you what did you think about, like, um, Julia in the book?
I thought Julie in the book, it, all of that relationship, her relationship with Frank and with Rory, right, as her husband in the book.
Yeah,
They changed his name in the movie, but I thought that whole little and I thought that whole triangle there made a lot of sense, and I like that you don't learn about it right away. You don't know.
yeah,
You kind of get the impression that Julia is unhappy, that she's just kind of like going along for the ride and not. But you don't know how deep it goes until later. So you slowly learn her
yeah.
relationship with Frank.
Exactly. Yeah, that was like, it was just like this slow build where and you like really feel like her depression almost, where and that kind of slowly builds, and you see like little things where, like, at the beginning, like, she talks about what he does for a living and how she kind of like looks down on him, and then it was like, oh, he can't fix certain things because like, on almost like he's less of a man
Yeah.
type deal. And from the very beginning, you're like, man, like, there's something off here, because, like, yeah, you're right, he doesn't tell you outright, like, the marriage is pretty much over. They don't, and it's just a slow build of reasons that she doesn't like him over the course of the book.
Yeah, she's not that overt about it either. That's what I liked is that she
Yeah,
wasn't, um, overt about it. So he doesn't really have any idea how, or maybe he should know, but it's not. She doesn't come out and tell him, or she doesn't, do as much as she does in the movie to show her, unhappiness. I guess you can say. So it's kind of a he's oblivious to the whole thing.
he definitely is, like, off in his own world almost, and I think that's probably a reason why their marriage was falling apart too,
Yeah.
because he was off doing his own thing, and he didn't see, any of the signs. And I think a big one, is at the party that they kind of throw, where he's out, just having fun with his friends, drinking, and then she's just kind of, sitting off. And I think in the party, we're in her perspective, you know
Yeah.
yeah, and she's just sitting off to the side.
And I did also like too that they give some background about the house when they start to move in, and they talk a little bit about the house and the history, and it's been in the family, and you kind of it has more weight to the house than it than the movie did. But so I did like there's a lot of things we learn about all the characters, the backstory in a short period of time because the book is only what 130 pages long, well 150, but the print is huge. So it's really I don't know how many words it is, but it's it's not very long, but it gets a lot done, and especially that first quarter, first half. There's a lot that we learn.
Yeah. Well, and you know, that's one thing, like, right at the beginning, when, Frank opens the configuration, and the Cenobites first are, kind of presented. It's like, the way that they are described is just, it's so crazy, and I you get so much, like you said, that you get so much, um, but then, like she said, they do give you a description so you can kind of picture it in your head, but it still leaves certain aspects to the imagination, where he gives you enough to where you can just kind of run wild with yourself, and you're like, man, these things are freaks,
Yeah, yeah. And when they do come, I did like too that they come and it's almost like a an agreement you make. It's not just a well we're here so
We're taking you,
you're coming. It's just like this is what we offer. You know, do you want to come or don't you? So it's almost like a you work so hard to get the box open. They show up and then You have to make an agreement with them. It's not as forceful. So I like that too. That they come, you see them, and you have an idea of what you're in for, and you still say yes.
Yeah. I love the way that they talk when the Cenobites first come in, and they give you this aspect of like, you're not the first, right? And that we've been doing this for a long time, so as a reader, you're already kind of planting like this background of these, interdimensional beings, and you're like what did they just go over? They just been going around doing this for thousands of years or however long.
Yeah.
And I think that's another reason it kind of set up for him to kind of expand, on this universe. But like you said, Rory, he or Frank was all talking about. Oh, it's like I've done this and I've been here to these clubs and everything, and I need the purest, and they're like, I love how I forget who it was, but they were asking like, well, we'll have to do something to your nerve endings because your human body can't uh, comprehend our pleasures. And I love it's kind of almost like an alien thing where it's like we we expect we expect everything to be like us.
Yeah.
But, so our pleasure should be their pleasure, right? And Clive Barker's like, no, that's not what it is. Like they're totally different beings from us.
Yeah. I thought that whole thing was, like I said, you learn a lot, and just I don't know, they're not with him for very long, but when the Cenobites come, oh hey Pax, when the Cenobites come, and they explain all of this to him. I think that set up Frank too, that um, he was curious about all these things. He wanted to achieve these higher levels of pleasure, and I don't think he had pain so much in his mind. He just wanted.
Yeah,
It's like he was addicted. He was, like it was almost like a drug for him. He wanted more, and he wanted the higher high, and he was willing to take whatever else. He was willing to accept whatever else came with the deal, just to
yeah,
achieve those highs. And I did like that it seemed that they've been doing this for a long time, but it wasn't as often. It wasn't a box, like I said, you can just press a button
yeah,
and they show up. So I like that too, because it was something you would have never heard about before, because it's been happening, but it's rare. So
yeah,
it's not as common as, someone just grabbing the box. Otherwise they'd be pretty busy.
yeah. Well, and they even kind of allude to that later, where they're like, um, his well, I guess it would have been the friend in the book got a hold of it and was able to manipulate it. And she's like, and they were like, well, most of the time that this happens, people know about us. Kind of like you said, it's like you have to research this thing, and there's a lot of steps involved. It's not just for the most part, it's not just an accidental. Oh, you accidentally picked up the box, and now they're here.
Yeah, forget her name. Oh, Kirsty. Um, yeah, I think she was able to open the box because of the blood on the box. So when she was inspecting it, when the doctor handed it to her, oh hey Kayla, when she was playing with it, and there's blood on the box and in the creases, so she kind of had like a head
Onto
start
it.
on how to manipulate, what to do with it. She kind of started to kind of piece it together. So that was kind of almost by accident. It's almost like they gave her a break because
Yeah,
it was by accident. That's another thing that I liked about the book, is that it was almost they were, I don't say reasonable, but they were like, we give you some leeway, but if you don't prove this, then you're coming with us.
yeah, yeah. That's yeah, and I just you can tell that Clive Barker really kind of thought all this out, and he wanted to make other people kind of think about like, well, what you have to do this and you have to do that. It's like it's not like, I guess it's not instant gratification,
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly. You have to earn it.
well, and I don't think it's very hard to get to the conclusion that the whole thing with Frank is it's basically like a drug. You know,
Yeah.
you know
Yeah,
he
this
you
is
know
it's a drug, and I wondered if because he wrote this during the '80s. I wonder if it was during that whole cocaine um, time period when that was really people were really big into cocaine. I wondered if that was part of it. Um, I don't know if he's ever talked about that, but just some of that came to my mind when I was reading it because it did seem like it was an addiction that he was just
absolutely, yeah, yeah, that and kind of looking into a little bit of it as I have, I wouldn't be surprised if that was the case. With him, thinking about this as he's hanging out in those clubs in the '70s. Like what the Studio 54 in the '70s was the cocaine and
yeah
all that stuff. So that definitely would not surprise me at all. But one of the big differences I seen from the book and the movie is they don't go into as in depth of what happens to Frank
yeah
once he gets pulled in to the other dimension or the gash, I guess.
yeah.
Um, yeah,
That was another
yeah,
thing. Yeah, yeah. Pretty on the
so
nose. Yeah,
yeah, he put yeah, that is one of those, like, I was like, yo, you're right on the nose there, Clive.
yeah,
You're not hiding anything, are you? Yeah.
yeah. He was pretty pretty yeah pretty pretty on the nose with that one. But yeah, I did like that they went into more detail because it leaves it pretty vague in the movie. But I did like in the book that it doesn't go into a whole lot of detail, but it gives you an idea of this is not a place you want to be.
Yeah, yeah. He talks about how, like, the chains and everything, attaching to him, and like, his skin being tore apart. And and the crazy thing is, like, he does get to that euphoric stage at one point, and he's like, but then, like, something like he blacks out and wakes up and he's like on a bed of bones. And
Yeah,
I don't know and I'm not sure if that was the engineer or if that was just another random Cenobite that he was standing below, and she's like, oh, now you're awake, now the fun can really start. And
okay.
he's like, and you're feeling, you're like, Frank's not a great guy, but this is overkill. Like, if that's just the beginning of his torture.
Yeah, now that we're talking about it, I wonder if the whole he has to go through so much pain to get that pleasure. Like it seems like a lot of pain and a little bit of pleasure. I
Yeah.
wonder if that was also a whole like a with drug use and addiction, if because you have that come down and you have that the cravings and the withdrawals and stuff. I wonder if that was part of because you get the high and then you have to deal with the pain on the other end of it.
Yeah, yeah. You know what? I mean, I kind of, thought about that as being drug use, but I didn't, think about that until just now. You're probably right, where
Yeah,
it's like you get the high for an hour, and then the next 23 hours of your life is looking for it again, and
yeah,
going through withdrawals and all that. Yeah. So, yeah. I mean,
hmm.
now so this is why we do the discussions. Right now,
Yeah,
we can, like, kind of uncover some even deeper themes in the book that I wasn't even thinking about right offhand.
yeah. I
But
didn't even really think of it until now that we're talking about it. But yeah, it could be. But I did like in the book that Frank, at first anyway, towards the end we know but at first he just seems like a kind of a grifter, kind of a, you know, almost like a guy who just travels around and doesn't really care a whole lot about who he does, what he does to who, or he just seems like he's kind of out for himself. He doesn't seem, um, his relationship with Julia that one, the time that it did happen, it seemed like almost like an accident. It didn't seem as intentional. It just seemed like it kind of happened. Like it, of course, this shouldn't have happened, of course, but it didn't seem like he set out to seduce her. It just kind of, place and time. It worked out, and it just what he does. It's not. It's kind of like his life. It's not like um, he's not out necessarily to hurt people. He's just,
yeah,
a steamroller. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. And I think that was a good counterbalance to the way Rory is. Rory's just kind of like, I love my wife. I love the what we're building, and I'm gonna work hard and kind of provide for her. And he, and how many times does he tell Julie in the book? He's like, I love you,
Yeah.
and where his brother is kind of like, kind of like you said, he not necessarily going out of his way to do stuff to people. He's not like intentionally malicious,
Hmm.
but it's just like, I'm gonna do whatever whatever comes about and feels good, right?
Yeah.
And that kind of whatever feels good to me at the time is what I'm gonna do. And if somebody else's feelings or whatever gets in the way, then that's their problem.
Yeah.
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 uh and so you so you're like, it makes you not like Frank a lot, but then again you're like, well, he's not a villain.
Yeah.
He's just not a good guy.
Yeah. Yeah. And he does, and the, and Rory, he's just totally, has no idea what's going on too. But, um, I did like that in the book, and Frank seemed a little bit sympathetic. Like, he is kind of a deadbeat. He's kind of a, like a nomad grifter, a user, but he wasn't. So you did feel for him a little bit. So you could understand why Julia would be, drawn to him in a way, because he's the opposite of her husband, and he's not. You know, he's always been like that black sheep of the family. He's not, um, you know, that bad that everyone would just avoid outright. So you kind of get why Julia is attracted to him, and you get why there's some um, there's some interest there.
Yeah, he's like the quintessential, like the bad boy, right?
Yeah.
And dangerous. While her husband's the safe guy, you can rely on him. He's safe, and Frank's wild, and 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 like you said in the book, Frank does seem to care a little bit,
Mhm.
about his brother and stuff. Um, you know, because you do get Frank's kind of perspective a little bit, and he kind of talks, talking about his brother and stuff. Whereas, like in the movie, it seemed like he didn't like almost like they weren't even brothers. It was just like like a guy to mug on the street.
Yeah. Yeah. If I think in the book they, I don't know if, I think they mention it. They don't consider killing Rory. They don't consider him being one of the people that they draw into the room.
Yeah,
So I like that, because he wasn't, it wasn't like an automatic, okay, let's kill Rory and let's get out of here. It wasn't until later when they felt like they had to. Like, they were desperate. So that's when, uh it was Rory's time. But it was because, it wasn't just because he was there. So there was some, initially there was some, like you said, there was a connection there, at least a little bit. And they did talk about, um them when they were younger, and some of the moments they had as they were kids, and that kind of made it all worse in a way, like what was happening.
yeah,
But it was more on a personal level, and it wasn't at just because it was like a tragedy. It wasn't just because he's this, bad boy or whatever.
yeah, yeah. And I do believe, they had some scenes in the book where they were kids and like talking about him growing up, and actually like Rory. This is another thing that they kind of took away from the movie, but Rory actually felt bad for Frank at parts, in the book.
Hmm.
He was just like, he got off on the wrong path, and it's people. I don't know if he'll be able to ever make it back, and but in the movie, he was just like, ah, yeah, he's
Whatever.
gone.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's probably. I think one of like the very first scene when they walk in the house, he was just like, he's probably on one of his benders or whatever. We won't see him for another 4 or 5 months. Like,
Yeah.
couldn't care less about. I'm like, man, this is not a very tight knit family over here.
No, it wasn't. And I think, the other thing I really liked about the book is that, when Julia did start bringing men into the room, it took her a while to
Yeah,
to kill
yeah,
people.
yeah. She wasn't like this instant assassin,
Yeah.
But I love and I think the book did this a lot better. I grew up as the movie guy, not the book guy, but
Yeah.
so you don't want to try not to be the book snob person here, but I do. I think the way he described um, Frank in the like pieces of Frank still in the wall as Rory cut his hand, and describing the absorbing the blood, and then when she walks in there, he has enough strength or whatever to like Julia,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know, uh, you know, and then it's like, and then it's almost like kind of like you were talking about the history with the house. So it almost for a little bit it turns into almost she almost feels like it's a haunted house type,
Hmm.
situation where she hears her name being called, and then I think all he was able to say is Julia and then blood, and she has to kind of
Piece it together.
piece that together, and that's another thing like kind of like we were talking about earlier. It's like things don't just happen. They're kind of you have to the characters earn them through either figuring them out or working on them.
Hmm.
You know, and to your point with you know the bringing men into well first actually they even start they start her off at the bar, and then like her trying to figure out who would be who she'd be able to actually take down and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. uh, I I
Yeah.
I love that section. Because she's kind of being realistic about like, oh, okay, who could I bring? Who's the biggest sucker here at the bar? But then again, she's not this like assassin. Like she doubled. She's almost doesn't do it. You
Hmm.
know, because she's like fighting the courage to actually attack
Yeah.
the men.
That seemed more, I don't say believable, but that seemed more likely to me that she would have those doubts and like who the size and their personalities and like who would I be able to overpower, at least surprise,
Yeah.
who is seems physically able, who can, and also when she gets them in the house, it takes her a little bit, like I said, it's not instant. They don't just keel over and die after 3 hits with a hammer. I mean,
Yeah.
it takes a lot more than that.
Yeah, and they actually do a decent job in the movie with the first person that comes in. It's like because she goes up, they go upstairs into the what did they call that the damp? Do they call it the damp room or
Something like that, yeah.
and he's like, there's no bed. He's like, you could already see he was like, something's not right here. And
Yeah.
then I think the guy even tries to get away, and then that's when she hits him. So it's not as bad as a lot of the '80s stuff where it's just like, oh, let's walk through the let's walk through the forest. There's definitely no killers out here. You
Yeah.
know, the '80s slasher. Uh,
And I think they even reference his wife and kids too. Like, so they talk about him. Like, he starts to
yeah,
have second thoughts, and that was the first or second one, but one of them starts to have second thoughts and like, well, I should get out of, I should leave, and so that all seemed it added a lot more weight to it, and the build up to that. We'll talk about the movie, but I did like there was enough build up and there was enough, um, you know, leading up to that event that it gave it some weight. It wasn't just oh, there's a guy in my house, he's dead. You know.
yeah. It's just like where it could have easily just been like, oh yeah, he needed the blood, so I went out and grabbed a guy and took him upstairs and hit him over the head,
Yeah.
and it was easy peasy lemon squeezy, or whatever. you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
you
It did
know.
take. I think it did take a minute in the movie, but yeah, I did like and I'm trying not to be the book snob too, because in the book we have a lot more, inner dialogue. You have a lot more of the background than you do in the movie, but the movie is really short, and I
Yeah,
think they could have done some different things with it. But yeah, I did like all that, and I did like the Kirsty her role in the whole thing. I did like the kind of the friend who had a crush on Rory, who you weren't sure from her perspective what was really happening. So I did enjoy that, her being like a friend who, um, you know, who had interest in the husband who didn't like the wife who had her own motivations, but you weren't
Yeah,
sure what she would do or how she would handle it. So that seemed more interesting to me than her being his daughter.
yeah, yeah, it was a lot different because like as I was going through the book, it was like, okay, is Kirsty like is she Julia's friend, but but yet she's closer to Rory, and and then you kind of get, and then as the book kind of progresses, you get that that she's kind of, I don't know exactly if she's in love with Rory, but she's she's definitely attracted to him. The one thing in the book for a little bit, the book almost turns into a detective story because she's Kirsty's trying to figure out. She goes, okay, so so Julia's doing this and she's going out over here, so it must be this, and then you see her like watching her from she follows her and then watches her from the uh you know watches up to the windows, and she's like, oh, she's definitely in there with a guy, you
Yeah.
know. Yeah,
Yeah, you're right. It does almost turn into a detective story, and then she has to find a way in the house. So she has to kind of, and she goes to the back door. She's trying to find a way in, and she remembers, you know, the gate was left open, and so all that too was part of the. Um, she wasn't just didn't stumble upon it. I guess she had to look into a little bit.
yeah. Kayla says, she's like, I thought she was a friend, was a coworker with Rory.
It could be, yeah. I forget exactly how they knew each other, but yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah, it wasn't because I thought Rory was wasn't he like a sculptor or something? Wasn't that like his thing?
I forget honestly.
Because that's how. Because and I think they do that. I feel like they did the scene differently in the movie than the book. Because of course I watched the movie later, but um, I thought he cut himself with one of his tools in the book
Oh, that's right. Yeah, he did cut himself. It wasn't on it. It
on
wasn't
a
a nail on the
nail.
wall.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's we'll get to that in a minute. But yeah, I did, and that was another part when he said she sees him as almost like less of a man when he couldn't handle the sight of
Yeah.
blood, and he was like, "Oh, I'm bleeding. I can't look at it." So yeah, that all made more sense to me than the nail on the wall and all that stuff.
uh, but yeah, so the way that she was, and like I said, I mean, I had thought that she was a friend of Julia's or whatever. So it was a little weird to me that she was like, it was almost like she's gonna tell on her friend,
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
But I
could
think
happen.
you know, and I was like, well, and me and my wife were watching. My wife watched the movie with me, so that and I was telling her what was what kind of happened with that, and she was like, we were both contemplating. It's like, well, would that happen in real life? Would somebody like just tell on their friend or whatever? But
Oh yeah,
yeah, you know, but Clive does kind of instill it in there. They're like, well, she's kind of attracted to him, so she probably would try to, you know, tell him to, maybe get her out of the picture if if she's cheating, you know.
yeah. You kind of get I got the impression that she would, if there was a way for her to get rid of Julia, she would. She's just looking for a reason to, and I think she even had. Wasn't she there, or she kind of had an idea that something happened between Frank and Julia? She had kind of have like a there was some suspicion there whether something happened or not on the wedding day. No, on the wedding day. Jeez,
Yeah, yeah,
on the dress or what was it? Like,
yeah. That was yeah. Thinking about that too, and it was just like, yeah, she was like, I forget exactly how, but yeah, there was something where she had an inkling that her and Frank had done something. Um, but yeah, I definitely think her mind was like, well, if I if she gets bumped out, then because she always through the whole book she was like, Rory's such a great guy, and he does all these things for her, and you're like, okay, is this like especially in this book, like of what the reader knows is going on that she doesn't. We're like, okay, this is kind of a weird. If you're trying to do a love triangle thing here, this is already messed up. You know?
Yeah, yeah, it was, yeah, it was a couple going on there. Yeah, and one thing that did confuse me as I was in the moment as I was reading the book was when after after Kirsty finds out what's happening and she ends up in the hospital and they give her the box and she remembers what happened, but she doesn't want to say anything. It's like, why wouldn't you say anything if
Yeah,
Rory's possibly about to be murdered in his own house? Like, why wouldn't you say, send the police over there? She's murdering men, or
yeah,
this is all. So that, at the time, I wondered why would you not say something, but then thankfully she didn't because it works out in her favor later.
yeah. Um, but yeah, that's one of those one of those things, and especially like the scene in the movie where she's in the hospital is very 80s.
Oh, yeah, we'll get to it.
uh, but like one thing I really liked, um, and they do change it up a little bit in the movie, and I'm guessing there were some cool visuals on this part in the movie, but I'm guessing they had to change some of it because of what they had at the time graphically. But just the way he draws in the blood and stuff through the room. Oh man, and the way he the way he devours the bodies, I'm like, man, that was cool. Yeah, you know,
Yeah, I think in the book there's like nothing left, right? It's just like almost like bones left, or there's not much.
yeah, it should. Yeah, it was almost like a spider where he kind of just sucks everything out, and there's like yeah, some skin and some bone left. It was enough that she could put it into a trash bag and it not be obvious.
Yeah, yeah, and that to me was more effective than in the movie. But yeah, having
Yeah,
like nothing left. Yeah,
yeah. Like I said, when me and my wife were watching the movie, I'm like, that's something that they could have done.
yeah,
They could have implemented that in the movie. I'm like this is like one of those '80s horror, like, oh, trying to get rid of the body.
yeah,
I was just like, I'm like, you showed us how you did it in the book.
yeah,
Just do it that way, and
yeah,
it makes sense and it's easy.
yeah. I don't understand that either. It would have made a lot more sense to me just to have be a lot easier to film too with just like bones or
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, just like a goop or something or whatever.
yeah,
But
yeah, yeah.
oh my god.
Oh,
But
this gonna be fun.
all right, well, if you want to if we want to kind of start cycling a little bit into the movie,
Well,
uh,
what did you think about the end of the book? What were your thoughts on the
oh
end?
yeah. So the way the book ended, I really, especially with the Cenobites and um, how they kind of they let her go because well at first they were gonna kind of take her because we were talking about that earlier where she's able to get the box open and then they're like, well, this happens from time every once in a while, somebody doesn't know that we're coming, so but it doesn't matter, you open the box, so they're like, let's get on with this. And she's and I love how she's like, no, do you know who Frank is, do you know and they're
And they
like,
know right away.
yeah,
They know
they
who it
know
is,
right
right?
away, they're like, oh, good old Frank, yeah. And she's like, he escaped, right? I love that. She's selling him out as quick as she can. She's like, he got away from you guys, right? They're like, no, he didn't. Like, I promise you.
Yeah, yeah. I like that they knew who he was right away. Um,
Yeah,
it didn't take some explaining, and they were kind of like, well, you need to prove it. You need to, And when she does try to find him, and she comes back and Rory and Julia are there, and like we told, I told him everything. Julia's like, I told him everything. He knows what's happening. You thought did they go up and kill? What is she too late? Is she going to be taken because they got rid of Frank? So now is she screwed over because she promised the Cenobites that she would give him Frank, and now Frank might be dead or whatever happened to him. So now is what's going to happen to her? Is she gonna? That's what I thought was going to happen. I thought they were going to come and be like, okay, well Frank's not here, so
Yeah.
let's go for a ride.
Yeah.
Let's jump in. But I did like the way that he had to say outright that I'm Frank. So she
Yeah.
almost had to like lead him into it. She
Yeah.
had to like goad him into saying something, like make him say something. And of course, he ends up killing Julia. Well, almost. He stabs her, but yeah, and you do find out when he does stab Julia what what his motivations were because he just doesn't care about anybody, just and
Yeah.
he's desperate. So he had to. That's when he had that in him. It didn't really come out until he was faced having to go back. So Frank kind of takes he goes from like this deadbeat, grifter to murderer to I'm going to kill my brother to save myself kind of thing. So
Yeah.
I think he had more of a journey in the book than he did in the movie. Frank did.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. That's to me, that's one of the biggest differences from the book to the movie. It's like in the movie, Frank's almost a villain from the very beginning in the movie, whereas, like you said, he kind of takes stages up, and then he's using Julia to feed him energy, the blood and everything,
Yeah.
and then at one point he's just like, whatever I got to do, I'll sacrifice you too. I'm getting out of here. I'm trying, you know, and in a way you're like, well, I mean, you're like, well, if you knew how badly he was tortured and stuff, you would probably do whatever you could to get out of there too, probably.
Yeah, I think that you know, knowing what's in store for him, he would kill his brother to get away from it. But he was I don't want to say forced into it. That's how desperate he was. He was willing to sacrifice his brother to save himself.
Yeah, he was willing to do anything, and one of those differences is like he and I wasn't 100% sure why they went this direction, other than to just make it easier to kill the people that Julia brought in. But like Frank was kind of like almost like superhuman in a way, like where he was like really strong and really fast, and like you know, they say like, oh, he just took the guy, just snatched the guy up or whatever, or and then in the book, Chrissy's like, oh, he's so fat, I couldn't get away from him, and you know, but I do like how Clive Barker continues that whole like everything's not instant. Like when the Cenobites come to her when she opens the box, they're like they didn't immediately they didn't immediately like, all right, we're taking you. That's it. End of story. They're like, all right, show us.
Yeah.
And then she has to go and kind of earn her way out of being their victim.
Yeah.
But yeah, I love that whole like where she's like basically kind of trying to trick him into being like, tell me who you are, you know, and it's so weird. I think because I think they do it in the book and the movie where he calls her daddy or whatever, and
Yeah.
in the movie that makes more sense, but he's just using that kind of as being creepy in the book. But she's like,
Yeah. 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 The whole I kind of saw that as like an intimidation thing that he was doing in the book, trying to like intimidate her or kind of like um, make her just stop. So let me kill you really quick and
yeah.
get on with it.
But yeah, I liked how she kind of like it's like I said, we almost went into this detective type story, and she had to trick him into revealing who he was, and then because you're thinking he's dead, like you said, she's now she's the victim. This
Yeah.
whole thing took a even darker turn than the book's already been. you know but then you kind of and they kind of do a decent job at at that in the movie almost, where it's like, okay, so as soon as she gets him to reveal, it's like now everyone, all the people who are reading the book are like, oh, here we go. Now the Cenobites to the crazy freaking evil people to the rescue, and then they kind of show up and he's like, oh my, uh, and then the chains start coming back out.
Yeah, I did. Looking back on it, it's a short book, but there's a lot in a short period, and I did really like Clive Barker's writing. Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely think like uh, he's done a lot of shorter books and short stories, and then he has some really long ones too. But I think he made that he made it that way on purpose. You could tell because I mean he could have fluffed this story out and into a 300-page, 400-page book if he wanted to, but I think he had an idea of exactly what he was. I mean, and obviously all the stuff that he's done since then kind of shows that like I guess he had a plan, because I
Mhm.
think the movie was just a few years later. I want to say the book was what, 83, 84, and the movie was what, 87.
Yeah, the movie was 87. The book was 86.
Oh,
Oh,
86,
91. Sorry,
81.
91. I'm sorry. Yeah, 91. So 6 years later. That's pretty quick though, because this is the
Yeah.
first 1981 by Harper Paperbacks, Harper Collins. So it looks like that's pretty. And I'm surprised this was chosen for a movie.
Yeah, I don't know if, and that's what I've always wondered with these adaptations, especially of books that aren't like giant books.
Hmm.
Like, Harry Potter just, blew up and everyone in the world had hair. So you're like, okay, that makes sense, right? And certain other things, but you're like, well, how did you get these books get, so quick? So I don't know if he had like connections, in Hollywood, or, something along those lines. And then, kind of the same ways. I mean, Michael Crichton was popular as a writer, but like, to just like he had some connections, because I think he ended up didn't he end up like creating like ER and stuff.
Oh
So
wow.
you have a lot of these writers that aren't like megastars at the time, and I think Neil Gaiman kind of you know his popularity kind of blew up once he got his first adaptation, and I think that happens a lot. Like it's almost like if you look at like Sanderson is the biggest author that doesn't have an adaptation yet.
Hmm.
Like, kind of if you look at like Twitter followers and stuff like that, at least before the Kickstarter, he was somewhere in like the 200,000s, and then
Wow.
you have like Neil Gaiman, who is at like 2 million, and you're like, do people really buy more Neil Gaiman books than they buy? But it's because he's got those adaptations. I think that's as soon as that happens, you just skyrocket. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah. It was. I'm sorry. It was published in '86. So you were right. November of '86. I had my dates wrong. So yeah, the initial publication date for Hellbound Heart was November '86. So yeah, it was about a year later
yeah. So
that they
they
made the
they
movie.
turned. So as soon as it hit, they must have been like he knew somebody or somebody saw it, and they're like, okay, yeah, we can make this. You know,
I wonder if he wrote it to be a movie initially, if it was his intention, because that's a quick turnaround.
yeah,
And during that time is probably when a lot of those other horror movies were killing it. So they probably wanted to follow kind of that what was hot at the time. Maybe is what I was
yeah,
kind of thinking.
yeah. Because I was gonna say like I think Friday the 13th was 1980, and then Um, Nightmare on Elm Street was 84. So it was, all those big horror movies. Yeah, I want to say Halloween was like the first of the slashers. It was like
Hmm.
78, something like that. But yeah, they were probably at their peak, you know, right about that time. So I'm sure like Hollywood studios were like, all right, what's the next big one? What's the next big horror? You
Yeah,
know,
like franchise.
yeah. And I think want to say Hellraiser has like 9 movies or something like
Really?
that.
Wow.
Yeah. And one of them was semi recent. Like I know they had a whole bunch in a row. They were chopping out a whole bunch of them in a row. Um, and then they went on a hiatus for a while. And there was like one in 2013, and then there was like one in 2018, I think.
Let's see. So the first movie was 87. Second one was 88, so a year later. Um, third one was 92. Fourth one was 96. Then 2000, another one, 2002, 2004,
You
2005.
came back.
Yeah, 2006, 2009, 2011, 2013, 2015, and of course now there's 2022. That's the one that we were talking about, is the new series that they're working on. I think on Hulu, right?
Yeah, that was so crazy too because I was talking to my wife. I'm like, oh yeah, me and Steve are gonna do a video about the book and the movie and then I just like I said I was doing some research on it and then I was like 2022. I'm like because I was talking to my wife. I was like, man, if they could do a reboot, with the technology that we have now, they could make it look really good because we watched the movie and we're like, yeah, this is definitely from the 80s,
Yeah.
100%. You know,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
especially at the end with the electricity flowing through the air and and the neon and everything. I'm like, yeah, this is you would not like anyone who would watch this who watches movies like, yeah, that is 80s animation right there.
yeah. Well, before we get into the movie, I think I just want to say I tried really hard to not be a book snob, like with the whole thing, because even not even reading the book, the movie is just not good. Even looking at it from the 2022 lens on a 1987 movie, it's just not good. Even you can look back and still appreciate what they did, but even in 87, like I did like some of the practical effects that they did and like the stop
Yeah,
motion.
at the beginning
Yeah.
with when the blood first hit.
And that
Yeah,
blood,
and
it
then,
looked like
right?
tomato sauce. It looked
Yeah,
like
but
marinara
like
sauce.
yeah, the thing I think they did really well, and then other things that like which boggles my mind. I don't know if they just ran out of money or something, but like when he was coming up through for 87, that was pretty cool. Like you said, like the stop motion and the putting the his body back together and stuff. But then not and then just like having her carry out a body later in the movie. I'm just like, you did that, but you can't like make it look like someone's being like sucked in, or something. It is so funny, because I kind of had the same view. Like I remember the movies, and from when I was really young, and so we sat down to watch the movie, and I'm watching this movie, and I'm like, man, I'm like, this movie is not as good as I remember it being. And then I'm thinking, oh no,
Oh yeah.
is that turkey?
When the hooks go into the skin, when it gets like close, it looks like a turkey, like they're sticking hooks in a turkey to for that effect, because the skin looks like they like little ridges in it, like it was a turkey skin, like where they cut
Oh
their
my
skin off.
god. Yeah, they might have too, and I was because I was looking at those effects. I'm just like, man. But then I remembered, like, we're going through the movie, and I'm like, there's a lot of things that I remember as a kid that I don't see in this movie, and so I was looking up stuff. It must have been because I remember more about Pinhead,
Yeah.
and so then I looked it up, and I'm like, oh yeah, that's from Hellraiser 2. When you get more about Pinhead, and funny enough, the first movie has okay ratings, and the second movie has pretty decent ratings. But then I was thinking, like you, I'm like watching this movie, I'm like, this is not great, not great. But I'm like,
It has. Yeah.
how did they spawn so many sequels off of it? I don't know if it was just a thing of the times, and like that's what people expected. So it made enough money where they were just like, okay, well, we made a profit. Let's keep rolling.
Yeah. It has a 6.9 average for the first movie. So, well, the first thing that struck me was pretty quick was the cast, because that is not who I had in my mind
No,
at all.
no. I told my wife that too. As soon as they popped on the screen, I'm like, they're old.
Yeah.
I'm just like, but then what he did, where he changed Kirsty from a like a friend to the daughter. Well, it's like, okay, well, now I know why they're old, because you're making her like 20. So now they got to be 40, 50 years old. But yeah, it totally threw me off when I first seen them. I'm like, this is not who I imagined in my mind when I was.
Well, I wondered because, okay, so they turned her into a daughter. So I thought maybe they're going to add some family drama. They're going to add some tension, some the evil stepmom.
Yeah, yeah,
So I thought, okay, well maybe it's just for a reason. But they never really, it never really changes anything about the story. Why did they change it to the daughter? In the book, I kind of picture them as, the Rory and Julia as like, 30s or 40s,
yeah,
but in the movie they seemed a lot older, and the wife was not at all what I especially the husband, or Rory, who is now Larry, was not at all who I
yeah,
pictured.
yeah. They depicted him so much differently in the movie than they did in the book. It was like, it was almost like he was more Frankish, in the movie, where, because like I said, he's in the book he was more reserved, more like, you know, scholarly type of person, reads books and then sculpts stuff and just kind of stays out. Here he was just kind of like, woman, get my stuff, and I'm just like, that's not the same character that I remember from the book at all.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up about how they speak to women, because something that struck me pretty quickly was the way that the men speak to the women, and how and the things they say to them. It's very of the times, because that would not be that would not like, rightfully so. I mean, that's not okay. Like, I
Yeah.
think like Kirsty was like, I'm tired, I should sit down, or I'm drunk, I should sit down, and the boyfriend at the dinner table is like, we should just lay down, ha ha ha. It's like, in
Well,
front of her dad. That was weird.
I think they did something similar to that, but again, it was, she wasn't a daughter in the book, but it was something similar to that, where the guy was trying to jokingly flirt with her, and
Hmm.
what she in the book, she said something like, "Oh, like she realized she was, I'm kind of funny when I'm drunk," or something. She made a joke, and she was, "People never think I'm funny," or
Yeah.
something to that effect. But yeah, like, one thing that I remember, like one of the things that kind of stuck out to me when you were talking about the way that they talk, is where where he cuts his hand
Yeah.
on
Oh
the
man.
nail when they're moving the couch. Like, did he have one or two movers?
Yeah,
I'm not
two
sure.
two movers on the other side of the mattress that they're trying to move up, and
Yeah,
those movers are a whole nother thing. Like,
they're like the worst
like
people.
the
Like,
yeah, biggest scumbags.
yeah, and I think because they switched it in the book, it was London, right? We were in London, I think.
I don't remember, to be honest.
But here is New York City, and they're using that trope, like, kind of, I don't know if you want to call it a trope or what do you want to call it, but like, New York City mean guys,
Yeah.
whatever, you know, and that's kind of how they were, the way that they were kind of talking and stuff, and you're like, yeah, don't know if it would go over well.
Yeah, I don't think
Yeah.
so. But yeah, about the mattress, and Julia's remembering her run-in with Frank, and during her memories, the mattress is going back and forth on the stairway, and that's when he cuts his hand on this nail.
Yeah.
It just like it's like this random nail puts this huge gash in his hand.
Yeah, that gash is freaking huge and it's not even the sharp point of the nail that gets him. It's the back end of the nail with the flat. I mean, yeah, it could cut you for sure, right? But like, it looks like someone took a knife and just like, ah. I
It
was
was
like,
so bad.
what is this? And that's another thing that, like, choices, and again, I don't know. I mean, Clive Barker directed it, but I don't know if he had like if they were like, oh, we have to do this, but like you didn't have to change how he got that cut. I mean,
Yeah.
it completely, I think they did it just to have that scene down there to make, you know,
Yeah, there's lots of odd choices like that. Like, change. And I know the adaptation won't be exactly as the book won't be exactly like the movie, but there are some really weird decisions they made. Um, the whole the like the homeless guy who with the big huge beard who's like,
what?
what is that
What does
about?
that have to do with anything?
I don't know.
Like,
I the only thing I could think of is that they were trying to set up the sequel. Like he was going to come
yeah,
to like they were trying to set up a franchise. It was going to be explained later, but really strange, really weird. Like, and the movie was only
yeah,
like 135 minutes.
yeah,
They could
yeah.
have spent more time fleshing out characters or having her. And I think they only filmed it at a couple locations. There wasn't very many filming locations.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and that was, kind of lends itself from the book because the book you hardly leave the house at
Yeah.
all.
Mhm.
Um, but I think with this, what she was at her like the pet shop or something like that, Kirsty, a
Yeah,
couple
at the pet
times.
shop. Yeah. She worked at the pet shop, and I don't know. Even if I mean, there's some good movies. I mean, it makes it sound like I hate all the '80s movies, but I grew up in the '80s. I mean, like,
Yeah,
there's some good movies from the '80s. This is not
yeah,
one of them.
yeah.
The acting was not was not good at.
Yeah, there was very like what I like to call overacting.
Yeah,
You know, because when I was younger, especially when I was in high school, like every year, and I'm weird, so I I would create a list of like the top 100 movies, and because I used to see tons of movies every year, so my friend Nathan and then a couple other guys were like, "Oh, you redo your list? Like, what made the list?
oh, that's cool.
Whatever." you know, and so, I would go and, do that. And there's like, you know, so you look and there's like a lot of good movies that are from the 80s. And this is, this is the way they made this. I felt so weird afterwards too. Cause I was like, I really remember this being an entertaining movie, and maybe it was that the sequels and being younger. I'm not thinking about like in-depth story. I'm kind of just thinking about cool visuals and people killing people. Maybe,
Yeah,
you know. Um, but maybe that's and like you said, the homeless guy made no sense. So I'm gonna at some point I'm gonna have to go and watch the second movie to see if he shows back up
I don't know
because
if I can
yeah,
do
it's
that.
like I don't know if I can do it. I don't know if I can do it. I'm definitely interested in the in the show. So we'll
Yeah,
see with with time and uh knowing the faults that they can come up with a more flushed out story. And I've always thought about this myself. Like this was a novella. It was a short book. Like you said, it's
mhm.
150 pages with big font, and you would have thought that they could have gotten most of this book into the movie. And you know,
Yeah, yeah. They could have. I think they could have done a lot more with it. I think they spent a lot of time on this like flashback that she has for like 5 minutes in the beginning of the movie.
yeah,
You know right away about her relationship with Frank. And they walk into this house and they're like, well, I don't know, no one's been here for years, and the electricity works. And it's like, well, someone's been there. And
yeah,
she finds this spot, and there's like this bedroom with all this stuff, like a bed in it, and they're like, well, it must be a squatters. And then they figure out it's his brother, and like, oh, okay, well, there's blood everywhere. There's like weird stuff on the walls. No big deal, you know.
yeah. It's whatever.
Maggots in the kitchen. No big deal, no big
It is
deal.
what it is. Yeah,
Yeah, but the husband was just, I don't know. Yeah, like you said, it's a lot of overacting in this one. It just
yeah,
and the special, I don't want to say special effects, but the practical effects, like the piece of wood that keeps spinning with the barbed wire on it, and like the pieces of meat on it. That was like,
yeah,
what is that? Like,
yeah. That was
why? Oh yeah, Danielson. It was very different back then. Yeah,
that was different back then.
yeah, but there's some horror movies that still live up to, that still they have that lasting power. Some movies just don't hold up. Some movies just don't. They're very of the time. I think this is one of them. But I
Yeah.
think you can say it just wasn't very good. I
Yeah.
don't know.
Yeah,
It
like,
just
like I said,
wasn't good.
I'm gonna, I'm a glutton for punishment, so I probably will watch the second Hellraiser at some point and see if maybe that's where I remember the goodness from, because and it had to, it obviously it found an audience, right? Because they kept making them, so they were making money making money somewhere, you know. But kind of like I said, like whenever I would make those lists, I would not put any movie that was before like 1970 on it.
Yeah.
I call it like the modern era because you can't, like, there's certain movies that are classics, right? They're the classics. But you go back and watch them and you're like, man, there's so much overacting in this movie. This is so, like, yeah, like, why are you screaming? You don't have to scream at this part. They're like, why are you yelling? Why are your
And
eyes so big? You
well,
know,
and Kirsty had the same look on her face the whole time. It's like this shock, disgust
yeah,
look, like the
yeah,
whole movie.
she had that whole, like, oh, what's
Yeah.
going on? Yeah, the big eyes,
In the hospital when she goes down the corridor and that big like overgrown slug chases her down the
yeah.
hallway and her running with the camera and you could tell she's like on a treadmill or something or like running in place and it just looks really silly.
Well, the only thing it was missing from the '80s was she needed to trip. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah.
she had needed to trip over some random stick that was laid out, and then it would have been like, oh, we've got it all. You know,
Yeah.
but it was like I said, I was watching it, and I was, because I had just because I think I almost went back to back, and from the book in here, and I was like, because I really enjoyed the book, and I was like, man, that's it really doesn't live up to the book standards, but and I was telling we were just saying about how short the book is, and you figure you could get everything in, and I haven't read The Hobbit, but I kind of wonder, and like, okay, so since they split it into three, did everything in The Hobbit get put into those movies since they did three movies? Because you know,
Yeah, I'm not sure. I haven't read it, but I think in fan it's a lot different in that genre too because they do a lot of world building and this was pretty I'll say straightforward, but there wasn't a whole lot of it's when you base something in like the time we live, there's a lot less explanation that has to go on. So
yeah. Well, and they didn't, like Kayla said earlier, like they didn't put they didn't give you too much detail about the other dimension aside from what was directly happening to Frank. So I mean, you got to see a little, like in the book, it describes a little bit of visuals, about like I said, like the pile of bones and the lady sitting up top, and and then all the hooks coming out and tearing at him. But it was more of a in his mind type, deal. He was telling you the pain and then the pleasure and but so you know, they didn't have to, pull that out in the movies, like you said, with the actual world building, since we're in modern times.
yeah, yeah, as close as the Hobbit goes. Yeah, those are long movies. Um, and speaking of overacting, Frank is the worst. I think he's the worst part. It is so like on the nose, 80s bad boy, you know,
Like
like
leather jacket and
yeah, with the
yeah,
motorcycle and the hair and
yeah,
oh, it was so bad.
yeah.
It was so bad.
Yeah, like I said, in the movie, they made him straight up villain. Like it was just
Yeah.
like, you know, the flashbacks you get, it's like it was almost like immediate. Like, I'm taking my brother's wife right now. It's gonna happen. You
Yeah.
know?
It's like he set out to do it. Like he was
Yeah.
like
Like,
it didn't just happen. It's
yeah, there wasn't like this
yeah.
accident of, oh, I mean, they kind of they made her kind of seem like she had some thoughts about it in the movie, like where she was kind of like, oh, maybe I shouldn't do this. But like, it wasn't like she didn't like resist him really. It was just kind of like, oh, I'm kind of, oh, this is weird. And Frank was just like, yeah, yeah, we're doing this. Like,
Yeah,
F my brother. Like,
yeah, exactly.
you know,
Yeah, and yeah, I like how after her first kill, after with the hammer, the first guy, she's just like a cold-blooded killer. Like they're
yeah,
watching that boxing match, and he can't stand the sight of blood, but he's watching this boxing match, which I didn't get. But they're
yeah,
watching this boxing match, and he's like, "Oh, I thought you couldn't handle this," and she's like, "Oh, I've seen a lot worse. Like, oh yeah, I
yeah,
killed a dude a couple hours ago. No big deal." It's like, what is going on with it? It's just so silly.
yeah. She was like straight up like femme fatale. You
Yeah,
know, she
with
had,
the her mustache, and she's like, "Oh," it's like,
yeah,
come on.
and I just love the outfit. Like, it's like the go-to, like the black long jacket with the glasses, and she's like, all right, we know you're up to no good.
Yeah, yeah. Speaking of glasses, the Cenobite with the sunglasses, that is hilarious. Was that in the book? I was trying to remember. I was going to look it up, but I forgot. But the stocky Cenobite with the glasses on, that the sunglasses, that was
Yeah,
another like
it
really
was
weird
weird.
choices.
I was telling my wife, I was like, I remember being a kid, and the scariest part was the Cenobite that didn't have any lips, and his lips just chattered.
Yeah,
Even like it's funny, like how the movie was kind of goofy, right? But like even my wife was like, that is pretty that is pretty freaky. Like she loves horror movies, but then again she gets scared
yeah,
at them. But and I can see why they started. They were like, okay, with the movies, we're gonna go in the direction of the Cenobites. Because I think that's kind of how they go. They put more emphasis on Pinhead because I mean that actor. I mean his voice is awesome. I mean, and I think for what little he had in the movie, I thought that was a pretty good. He acted pretty well and stuff. But like you said, like the other Cenobite with the the giant, he had like seven chins, and then he had the dark, the Vader sunglasses and stuff.
he looked like a Joe Pesci Cenobite or something. Like an '80s Joe
Yeah,
Pesci Cenobite,
yeah,
and
he was like a Joe Pesci meets Jabba the Hutt.
yeah, like a cross between them. And one thing I wish the movie would have done is follow the book with having us get to know Frank a little bit in the beginning, and showing us the Cenobites first.
Yes,
I think
yeah,
that would have built a lot more tension on in the very beginning of what we're dealing with, because in the movie, if I didn't read the book, I would have had any. It looked like felt like almost like a haunted house
yeah,
type of
yeah,
situation instead of it being like these interdimensional travelers. I think that would have been a lot better to follow the book in that first quarter or so to kind of make Frank into someone who's trying to contact them and not just like go out and buy a box and then he's in the room with candles and it happens. It takes more effort and it takes more time and kind of his
yeah,
motivations. Why is he doing this? And then you see the Cenobites, and then you would have had more, you would have feared for the other characters a lot more if you would have had that in the beginning.
yeah, and that's another thing. Like, because as the movie was going on, we were talking. I was like, well, why? Because like I said, it's been years, so I didn't remember exactly what they
Mhm.
changed or how the movie went. But I'm like, yeah, why did you not roll straight into him going into the Cenobites dimension at the
Yeah,
beginning? Because what they do kind of go back into that like halfway through the movie. They give you a quick glimpse of that, but I'm just like, why did you do it then? Why didn't you do it at the beginning of the movie so we know why Frank is acting the way he's acting? Because I mean, you're still not going to be rooting for him, obviously, but you know,
I hope
but
not.
you would feel you'd be like, okay, like we saw what happened to him at the beginning, so you kind of know why exactly he's acting the way he's acting. And in the movie, it's just like you said, he's just quintessential, '80s villain from the very beginning. You know,
The whole thing just didn't. And there was time in the movie to do it. It wasn't like it was a 2.5 hour movie they had to cut. But yeah, then the end with the bum. I love how the house collapses and then they
Yeah.
walk into this like field with random like piles of rubble that are on fire.
Yeah, it was almost yeah, it was almost like a comet had crashed or something like that.
Yeah,
Like I was,
yeah.
I was semi expecting to hear like dun 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 dun, and then like the Terminator comes up out of it. Like, but yeah, that the ending, and then what? Yeah, you get this weird again another '80s thing with the close up of the eyes of the homeless guy. Again, made no sense. But like you said, maybe they were using him to bridge the gap to another, like maybe he knows what's going on or something. I mean, that's the only thing I can think of.
Well, I think he morphs into like that skeleton dragon right at the end. He turns
He,
into that like
oh,
dragon thing, and then he flies away with the box, which is
yeah.
what?
Well, yeah, and the difference, and that's another thing I remember, and and it's funny because when I came up with the idea of like us doing this, I had no idea that Kayla did something similar, but she did it on her own. Um, but like she pointed out one of the things that she didn't like is in the movie they just have it magically reappear at the like the Orient the like what is it Chinatown or
Mm.
something where it was, and in the book it's one of the I don't know if it was Pinhead or if it was one of the Cenobites ends up dropping it into Kirsty's pocket.
Yeah,
So it was kind of like in the book it was kind of like okay now it goes to you have to decide what happens. It kind of puts it on her, and I think that's the thing that the book does really well. And kind of thing, something we've praised to the book the whole time is the book always puts like all right, you have to work for it, you have to work for it, nothing happens immediately, whereas the movie is the complete opposite.
yeah.
Everything seems to happen immediately.
Because if it did happen that randomly, that some dude and was like selling it to random people, and this bone dragon picks it up and carries it, it's like this stuff is happening all the time. But if it's something that carries on, it's almost like a curse that Kirsty has now that gets passed on
Yeah,
to her. It's like she has to deal with it now.
yeah, I
And
like that. I
yeah,
like that thought.
yeah.
Yeah,
So
but
yeah, I didn't. It didn't make it. It's just really silly. It was. I laughed out loud. I don't know how many times watching that movie. It was so funny.
yeah. Well, what's that other '80s movie that people are like, it's so bad it's good? It's like Trolls 2. Is it one? Is that the meme that everyone always brings up? Trolls 2 is the greatest movie in the world because it's the worst movie ever made, or something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was a handful of those. Like my wife is another one of these movies, and she talks about being like when we first got together. She's like, "Oh, Killer Clowns from Outer Space is like the greatest movie ever," and then
Oh,
like and then you watch it, and you're like, yeah, yeah, it's something, you know.
at least with that movie, I think they set out for it to be silly. Like they set out for it to be
Yeah,
goofy. It's like intentionally
it
bad.
knows.
It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's very self-aware. This movie,
it tries
uh,
to be serious,
yeah,
but
I think you should keep the writer away from directing and have
yeah,
a established director, to kind of get it to, produce the film. But yeah, Clive Barker does a lot of stuff, so maybe I don't know if he's directed other films, but yeah, this is not one of the best ones.
yeah. I know. He's wrote like, um, I don't know if it's a part of his Books of Blood. I don't
Mm.
know if it is or if he just wrote the script for the movie, but he wrote Candyman as well. And that's like,
Really?
yeah.
Huh.
So, and I didn't know that until I started kind of looking up his stuff. I'm like, holy crap! Like, that's a '90s, cult classic, movie. And I know they remade it just recently, and now I'm like, that's one of those movies I used to, because I don't know if my wife has ever seen it, but I was one of those movies that you kind of talk up to nostalgia. You're like, oh, Candyman was a freaking scary movie. Now I'm afraid to go back and watch it and be like, man, this is so corny. Because I could
Yeah.
see it being corny. And I'm like, okay, guy hooked bees in the wall, you know.
Yeah, I tried really hard to remember. Okay, it's 2022. This was made in '87. Just
Yeah, and it was
because
probably low budget for '87 too. I bet.
yeah, it was. They tried to go practical, and some of it was okay, but like the face at the beginning, I think there's things that they tried to do with the practical effects or like the special effects, like the lightning thing at the end. They could have what
Yeah,
and the boyfriend shows up, and all this weird stuff is going on, and he doesn't seem phased at it like by at all. He's just like, oh look,
he's
there's
like,
this giant slug in the hallway,
and
like
this is New York in the '80s, man. He said that's a slow Tuesday.
yeah, maybe that's what it was. But yeah, it was really really weird. Really, yeah,
Yeah.
not good.
Back in those days, they had alligators in the sewers and stuff.
Now they have giant rats, so the size of alligators.
Oh, oh my gosh! Don't get me into that stuff. Oh God, giant rats. Oh, but uh, well, I think we're about we're about at the halfway part. I think if we keep going, this is just going to turn into how bad was Hellraiser and how bad are '80s horror movies. But
Yeah.
man, I'd love to do this again. We maybe we'll try to find a maybe a better adaptation.
Sure. Yeah.
And but thank you all for watching, and thank you, Steve, for jumping over here and spending some time with me this morning.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. It's fun.
See y'all later.